Greetings, everyone. I am Dr. Noni Davis, and I'm coming from my shoelace Sya Academy, a legacy school here in Durham, North Carolina. We have been here for about 30 years. Oh, this month will be 30 years for Sya Academy and African Centered Education. And I am a legacy co founder and current owner of Sya Academy. And today I'm going to continue my discussion of where do we go from here. Today, last week I signed my high schoolers. I think the youngest is 15 and the oldest is 16 years old. 14, maybe the youngest is 14. And they're going to read this book. And today I opened up with, look, what does this title even mean for us? Where do we go from here? Chaos and community. And they were pretty. My daughter teaches them social studies, and so they are really pretty astute, I guess, of what's going on historically right now, and aware of ICE and understanding the trauma that's going on. And, we were able to discuss, what do you all think about, what this chaos is and what is that impact? If we continue down this road, how was that going to look? And they're concerned about civil war. They're concerned about the trauma of this, of the impact on families and impact on their own families, because we have some immigrant families here. Descendants, not first generation, but second generation. So they're concerned about their family members. And then what are some things we could do to build community? And of course, we got to provide equal rights for everybody, give equal access, and make sure we're creating a space where everybody can survive and have a good life and be taken care of. And so back to where do we go from here? One of the ironies of Dr. King's role as a minister was that, instead of, a lot of times you think about pastors and, he's the one that became a very, he's not the first one, but he became one of the most popular clergymen that was standing against this political climate. And he had a complete clarity of vision of what white nationalism was and how it absolutely corrupted the text. I'm not saying he was the only one, but he was the one that was, the most popular voice, the most critical voice that was out there in this time frame. And of course, that's the reason why they killed him. Malcolm X had his version of it, but he was not a pastor. He was, is practicing Islam. But for King had been raised in the church, knew the Bible, and was able to break down this foolishness. David Walker was another one, who said, hey, y'all not Christians. And then he also was disappeared. So, or murdered. So one of his quotes says that segregation is a blatant denial of the unity we all have in Christ Jesus. And another quote that he said was, okay, let me find it. You see, this was from Jason Sorosky.net. He said, you see, the founding fathers were influenced by the Bible. The concept of the image of God is the idea that all men have something within them that God injected. And this gives everyone a uniqueness, a worth, a dignity. And we must never forget this as a nation. There are no gradations in the image of God. No gradations. Every man from a treble white to a base black are significant on God's keyboard, precisely because everyone is made in the image of God. And so this was where King was standing. And he may or may not have believed, because I know there's a lot of discourse. Well, did he really believe that Jesus was the Son of God? And So he may not have been believing that Jesus was deity. I don't know. But, you go through his writings, what he did believe and hold firmly to were the scriptures of and the values of the scripture of love thy neighbor as you love yourself. So on page 76 here, I wanted to read this statement that he wrote in his book. It seems to be a fact of life that human beings cannot continue to do wrong without eventually reaching out for some rationalization to clothe their acts in the garments of righteousness. And so, with the growth of slavery, men had to convince themselves that a system which was so economically profitable was morally justifiable. So, if I can make money doing this, then I can justify it pretty much. And the attempt to give moral sanction to a profitable system gave birth to the doctrine of white supremacy. Um, Africans were literally reduced to slavery for uh, the economics of it. Religion and the Bible were cited and distorted to support the status quo. It was argued that the Negro was inferior by nature because of Noah's curse, all that foolishness upon the children of Ham. And then you have Apostle Paul's dictum that became a watchword: servant, be obedient to your master. And so now, okay, if you're a servant, that's your class, you have to obey your master. And in this strange way, theology became a ready ally. So, they extracted the scriptures they wanted to. And then, of course, we know they had a 33 chapter Bible, for a slave Bible that they created, which, how is this book holy if you can go and change it, change the little thing? I was telling the kids today that even the name, Yeshua, has been changed to Jesus. Why would they change the name and not leave the name the way of I mean, just learn how to pronounce it, right? How hard is it to say Yeshua? But anyway, so the great Puritan divine Cotton Mather, he's being very facetious here, called the Bible for passages to give comfort to the plantation owners and merchants. He went so far as to set up some, and he called it the Rules for the Society of Negroes, in which, among other things, Negroes disobedient to their masters were to be rebuked and denied attendance at church meetings, and runaway slaves were to be brought back and severely punished. All of this, he reasoned, was in line with Apostle Paul's injunction that servants should be obedient to their masters. The logic was manipulated to give intellectual credence to the system of slavery, and someone formulated the argument for the inferiority of the Negro in the shape of a syllogism. Syllogism. Okay, I might not be saying that right in my brain. Anyway, all men are made in the image of God. God, as everybody knows, is not a Negro, which is absolute foolishness, because God should be a spirit. Anyway, therefore, the Negro is not a man. You see how they just, made a statement and then came along and uh, drew a conclusion that is saying that God is a man. God is not a man, so that's a whole lot that is completely contradictory to the scriptures. And that may be if you're saying that Yeshua was not a Negro, but Yeshua is also deified, and he was definitely African, Afro-Asian, something like that. But to say, therefore, the Negro is not a man. So you just see how this is what they've been doing. This is what these people have been doing for how long? Their contribution came through the so-called academic dimensions. Eventually, or academics eventually climbed on the bandwagon and gave their prestige to the myth of the superior race. Their contribution came through the so-called Teutonic origins theory, a doctrine of white supremacy surrounded by the halo of academic respectability. So these folks created slavery, and we all should know this. We all know this, or should have an idea of it anyway, right? That Africans are literally reduced to slavery for the economic benefit of the wealthy class, and Europeans crave sugar, they crave coffee, and they crave cocoa. And all of these have something in common. They are stimulants. They are like the drugs. They were like the drugs of the slave trade. Um, and things have not changed because now we have fentanyl and cocaine and marijuana, all of those things, alcohol. Um, and so these mind altering trades were benefiting or were expanded because there was such uh, um, it was an addiction. Okay, so these people needed this stuff. Uh, the they said they used them to stimulate the energy for workers. And so in Europe, these workers in Europe were underpaid. They were not healthy. They were poor and destitute, and so they used sugar to give them a high. And that was during the Industrial Revolution. What I had to do is some research. I'm like, so where is this sugar? I mean, is sugar native to Africa? And there is a sugar plant that's native to Africa, but the sugar that that we're using came from Southeast Asia, and it has it came through the Moors. Just the Arabs, the Moors, brought sugar into Asia, and they also introduced it to Spain during when the Moors were in Spain. So that was under when Spain was under the Arabs. More Arabs were that when they ruled for about 700 years. Okay, so the production of sugar was extremely brutal, and therefore, they said they brought it during the 10th century. I forgot to want to make sure I gave you that date. But therefore, the Spanish began to colonize African islands because it required a tropical area to thrive in. And but it was brutal work because it was exhausting to the soil. And so they started by going to the Canary Islands Africa is here, and then you have Morocco, Gibraltar, and Morocco, right? Morocco's here, and then Portugal. I'm sorry, Gibraltar, Portugal, Spain, and so they started going south, and the Canary Islands are right there off the coast of Morocco, and so they conquered that island, and they forced the people to cultivate it. But sugar cane requires so much work. It requires rich tropical environment, moisture, and fertilizer from animal feces. So it it has it's exhausting because it's year round. It's a year round crop. You never take a break. I think it's one season is for picking it, and then they had to let it stay. It couldn't be too wet, and so you had to do all this monitoring it. And then when you're planting it, it requires, like I said, a lot of feces. So you've got these people out there exposing their bodies to breathing in shit, boop, 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 and everything. And so this is how they're doing this. And it depletes the soil. So that's when you understand, oh my God, the reason why they had to keep moving from place to place is because they were destroying the soil, destroying the ecosystem, trying to grow sugar. And so they they just said move from one place to the other, and it was all greed. It was all these planters had to have this sugar. And so they literally sought new lands to grow sugar and enslaved Africans because we could endure the tropical climate. So that was what it was going on. And so even this lie about, oh, Europeans were looking for spices in Asia. No, they weren't. They were trying to find places to grow sugar cane because they were addicts. They're addicted to sugarcane. Dr. King may not have known this information, but he did realize that the corruption of religion was not tied to the humanity of Africans, but to the extreme greed of wealthy Europeans who corrupted the Bible to justify the enslavement of Africans. And so here on page 77, they talked about, I introduced that whole idea about the Teutonic, their contribution came through the so-called Teutonic origins theory, a doctrine of white supremacy surrounded by the halo of academic respectability. Um, the Teutonic tribal institutions of ancient Germany, and furthermore, that only the Teutonic race had been imbued with the ability to build stable governments, was what Anglo-Saxon institutions began developing. They just started that we're going to make our historical roots Germany of the Teutonic race. Now, historians from the lofty academic towers of Oxford, like Bishop, I don't even want to talk about these people. I don't want to give them no energy. Origin theory in British intellectual circles. So it started in England, and it leaped the Atlantic and found lodging in the mind of people at Johns Hopkins University, and then the founder, who was the founder of the Historical Association, and then they had three homes. To say England, Germany, and the United States. Now they know they ain't had no homeland in the United States. Pretty soon, this distorted theory dominated the thinking of American historians at leading universities like Harvard, Cornell, Wisconsin, and Columbia. A whole school of racial ethnologists developed using such terms as species, genus, and race. There was nothing before that. There was no idea of racial stuff. It became fashionable to think of the slave as a species of property. It was during this period that the word race came into fashion. I've already talked about this fool who said that Africans were inferior to white people and if they had drapetomania and all that foolishness. Well, he also was the one that decided that the enlarged head, the larger skull of a person, dictated their superiority. The Neanderthal heads, basically, they said that Neanderthal head meant that you were the smartest person. And used pseudo-scientific evidence to prove that the black man was a little above the level of an ape. So they did all of that foolishness, and I'm just not reading no more of that because it's so dumb. But so I went and looked at the Teutonic race of Germany. So I said, okay, so they claimed that they were the superior race, steeped in pseudo-scientific ideological beliefs. And like I said, they decided that the head of a European was larger, and so their brain was larger, and And so, but we got to remember, these people all have DNA, Neanderthal DNA. Black people don't have that, so whatever. But Teutonic is actually a term used to describe Germanic people, including Scandinavians. And these people were defeated by the Romans in 105 BCE. Nazis mythologized this group of people as superior with no credible documentation and used it to make themselves the top of an imaginary hierarchy. So Dr. King presents this argument clearly that this propaganda campaign was elevated um, was elevated to and expanded by academic institutions and used as a political tactic to nullify poor people. Now, poor white people, they knew they weren't superior to nobody, but what do they have to do? They're mad. They lack critical thinking. We know that a lot of these people were starving, and so epigenetics for them would be, um, you know, poor nourishment. And they said the same thing about Scotland. There were, in Ireland, and so there were, and even in England, there were workhouses and stuff like this. So these people were poor. They were not smart. They were and they were hungry, and so the only thing that they could figure out to get these white people on their side was to at least I am superior because I'm white. I'm a descendant of these Teutonic folks. Uh, and so therefore I am anyone who is not white is less than me. And then of course, anyone who's not male is inferior to me. My greatness is in my skin complexion, which was the development of this racial thing. And so then on page 80, Lord have mercy, these people be doing. No human being is perfect. In our individual and collective lives, every expression of greatness is followed not by a period symbolizing completeness, but by a comma and implying partialness. implying partialness. Following every affirmation of greatness is the conjunction, but uh Naaman yeah, I think I'm pronouncing this right. Naaman was a great man, says the Old Testament. But and that but reveals something tragic and disturbing. But he was a leper. So George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and all that crew were great men, but and that but underscores the fact that not one of these men had a strong, unequivocal belief in the equality of the black man. No one doubts the valor and commitment that this person, George Washington, that characterized George Washington's life. But to the end of his days, he maintained a posture of exclusionism toward the slave. He was a fourth generation slave owner. He only allowed Negroes to enter the Continental Army because His Majesty's Crown was attempting to recruit Negroes to the British cause, and Washington was not without his moments of torment. Those moments of conscience when something within him told him that slavery was wrong. And as he searched the future of America one day, he wrote to his nephew, I wish from my soul that the legislature of this state could see the policy of gradual abolition of slavery. It might prevent much future mischief. Where are we in 2026? Okay. In spite of this, Washington never made a public statement condemning slavery. He could not pull away from the system. And when he died, he owned or had on lease more than 160 slaves. All right. So Dr. Kling clearly addresses these issues that we are facing today. Today, I had my students watch a Revolutionary War documentary about the Revolutionary War. And so you had George Washington and you had Lord Dunmore of the British military forces. And both of them were calling each other monsters. They're like, you crazy, you ain't right. You up here messing with our freedom and da 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 da. The reason why I was so obscene is that Washington is calling Dunmore a monster because he wants to seek his freedom from Britain. So you are blocking my freedom from Britain, and he's mad because what did Dunmore do? Lord Dunmore, who himself he was a monster. He owned enslaved people in the Caribbean. He had plantations all over the Caribbean, but he was going to free these black people in America if they came and fought for him against the British. I'm like, you talk about a cycle of mental illness. That it was to say white men are playing themselves. So, you own slaves, but you want your freedom, and you own slaves in other places, but you are going to try to collapse this government by getting their slaves to fight against them. Okay. White men played themselves into thinking that their freedom, their rights, their desires were more important than any other people on the earth and claimed that God had sanctioned it. Mental illness. But we know that the colonists, these political giants and strategists, did not truly believe this stuff in their speeches, and political stance, and that is proven in the diary entries written in their later years. So just like we said, George Washington knew this was some mess, and he knew it was going to be a big problem if we didn't get it straight, because there's no way you can continue to perpetuate this nonsense. And so Thomas Jefferson reveals the same ambivalence. There is much in the life of Jefferson that can serve as a model for political leaders in every age. He came close to the ideal philosopher king, that Plato dreamed of centuries ago. But, and also, wait, let me pause and go back. Now, Africans have been doing this before Plato. We had already established democratic societies on the continent of Africa. But we're going to get Plato his little stuff. Okay. But in spite of this, Jefferson was a child of his culture who had been influenced by the pseudo-scientific and philosophical thought that rationalized slavery. And so they had to rationalize slavery because they needed that money. They were greedy. They got to have this money. So, but in spite of this, Jefferson was a child of and philosophical thought. In his notes on Virginia, Jefferson portrayed the Negro as inferior to the white man in his endowments of body, mind, and imagination, although he observed that the Negro appeared to be superior at picking out tunes on the banjo. Jefferson's majestic words, all men are created equal, meant for him, as for many others, that all white men are created equal, except if you didn't have land, if you were not a property owner. And of course, this excludes women. Yet in his heart, Jefferson knew that slavery was wrong and that it degraded the white man's mind and soul. Do you see that? It degraded their mind and soul. Look at who we have in the White House right now. In the same notes on Virginia, he wrote, "For if a slave can have a country in this world, it must be any other in preference to that which he is born to live and labor for another." So they can't live in the same world. Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever. The Almighty has no attribute which can take sides with us in such a contest. And in 1826 years before his death, he wrote these melancholy words. But the momentous question of slavery, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I considered it at once as the nail of the Union. I regret now that I am now to die in the belief that the useless sacrifice of themselves for the generation of 1776 to acquire self-government and happiness to their country is to be thrown away by the unwise and unworthy passion of their sons, and that my only consolation is to be that I live not to weep over it. And so his sons, the children of these people, are seeing that, oh, wow, we may have messed up. I think we messed up. And they did. They messed up. Few men in history have anchored their lives more deeply in moral convictions than Abraham Lincoln. But on the question of slavery, Lincoln's torments and vacillations were tenacious. So he too was vacillating. They knew that this was wrong. They knew it, and he did not. The only I want to go back to Thomas Jefferson. We know that who wrote a letter? Benjamin Banneker wrote him a letter and saying, "Look, man." So while he was alive, he got this letter. Benjamin Banneker said, "Look, this is messed up, bruh. You are really messing up." I'm sitting here. I have, he had written an almanac, had predicted, what was it? I think it was a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse, and all these things in his laboratory. Plus, he built the oldest, the first clock based on a pocket watch, and he made this clock, and it lasted for 40 years or something like that. And so that was his contemporary. So he knew that this was some foolishness. And also, the people who built his house, yeah, he was designing this stuff, but those Black people were the ones that were building that house. I've been to Monticello. My daddy was a historical buff, so I've been there. I know what this is. So, that these Black people were the ones, and we saw where Sally Hemings' house was, right underneath his room, so he could just tap on that, "Come up here, girl," or go down there, wherever she was, because her house was right under his room, her space. You had to walk down the steps and stuff like that in a basement. So here we are about to celebrate a date, July 4, 1776, the beginning of a democracy, according to American history. And it is the biggest fraud in history. Diabolical, hypocritical, and the most destructive practice to mankind in current history. I can't go beyond 500 years. I don't know what they did right here. So these 500 years have devastated, destroyed Black and brown people all over the world. And the practitioners of this cult knew that it was wrong. They knew they were doing. And this is the story that we have to tell. We have to let people know this is mental. This is crazy. And that's all I got. Ashe. Ashe, ashe. Oh.
If you're talking, they will hear you.
We all want our kids to grow up safe and healthy, so we show them how. And we tell them with honest conversations that let them know what we expect. Not just one time, but every chance we get. That's especially important when it comes to alcohol and other drugs. Kids not only need to know the dangers and how to avoid them, they need to hear it often from you. And when it comes to pain medications, opioids, they need to know that they should never be taken without a prescription and never shared with friends or family. It's dangerous and illegal. So talk with your kids and guide them through the challenges of growing up safe and healthy. Because when you talk, they hear you. For more information about talking with your kids about underage use of alcohol and other drugs, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
So talk, they hear you. You can do it if you try.
I'm a St. Sya student. Of course I walk into the sound of drums.
I'm a St. Sya student. Of course I know my mother.
I'm a St. Sya student. Of course I can play the drum.
I'm a St. Sya student. Of course I can work with my hands.
I'm a St. Sya student.